The usher's voice was polite. The message wasn't. Not tonight. Outside Hollywood's most important room, Native Americans were being stopped at the doors by security like they were a threat, while inside, the industry that had spent decades turning them into villains prepared to congratulate itself. And then Marlon Brando did something no superstar was supposed to do on the biggest night of the year. He didn't show up. He didn't play along. He turned the spotlight into a courtroom mouse and sent a message so explosive the Academy's own people were ready to pull the microphone, and a furious legend had to be physically held backstage. One decision, one refusal, and Hollywood's glamour cracked, just long enough to show the raw truth underneath. Here is the story. Hollywood, early 1973. The air still smells like cigarettes and expensive perfume, with a sharp edge of hairspray and nervous sweat. Limos glide up to the Dorothy Chandler Pavilion like black sharks. Flashbulbs pop in nervous bursts. The Oscars are not just an awards show, they're a coronation. The industry gathers to celebrate itself, to smooth over the year's sins with gold statues and practiced smiles. But outside that velvet-lit world, America is tense. Vietnam is still a wound that won't close. Cities feel like powder kegs. And the country's oldest injustice, what was done to Native people, has stopped being a quiet shame and become a loud confrontation. Wounded Knee is in the headlines. The American Indian movement has forced a nation to look at what it spent a century trying to forget. Now place Marlon Brando right in the middle of that storm. By 1973, Brando is no longer just an actor. He's a force that makes studios uneasy. He's unpredictable. He's brilliant. He's a man who can deliver a performance that changes the art form and then refuse to play by the rules of the people who profit from it. Publicly, he's the icon from On the Waterfront, the face from A Streetcar Named Desire. Privately, he's restless, angry, haunted by what fame costs and what silence enables. He speaks about civil rights. He speaks about exploitation. He listens when most of Hollywood only talks. And then The Godfather happens. The film turns him into power again. Not nostalgia, power. He's nominated for Best Actor, and everyone expects the ritual. The tuxedo, the applause, the speech that thanks the right people and offends nobody. That's what the Academy is built for. It rewards talent, yes, but it also rewards obedience. Brando is not obedient because he knows something the audience doesn't want to admit. Hollywood's wealth was built partly on stolen stories, and when it told stories about Native Americans, it didn't just get details wrong, it trained generations to see Native people as less than human. And the night he's expected to accept his crown, Brando plans to indict the kingdom. But here's what nobody knew in that moment. Security was already on edge about political disruption. Native activists and Native guests were being treated like a problem to manage, not people to welcome. And the Academy had quietly prepared for a scene, because they could feel one coming. And that's where the story takes a turn. Brando's decision doesn't begin on Oscar night. It begins earlier in the long, uncomfortable gap between what Hollywood says it is and what it actually does. He had spent years watching Native characters played as jokes, threats, ghosts in their own land, scripts that turned massacres into battles, theft into destiny, and survival into something to be mocked. He saw how a camera can be a weapon when it points in only one direction. So when the nomination arrives, it doesn't feel like a celebration to him. It feels like leverage. He starts writing, not a cute note, not a polite thank you, a statement with teeth, page after page, naming what Hollywood did and what it kept doing. And he decides the most powerful thing he can do with that Oscar is not to hold it up, but to refuse it. That's a career-killing move in the old Hollywood religion. You don't embarrass the Academy. You don't hijack the ceremony. You definitely don't do it at the exact moment the cameras are on you. Brando does it anyway, but he doesn't just refuse the award from a distance. He chooses a messenger, Sacheen Littlefeather, a young native woman with quiet strength and a voice steady enough to stand in front of an audience trained to smile while it sharpens knives. She agrees to go in his place, not as a prop, not as decoration, but as a human being carrying a truth Hollywood spent a century dodging. And the closer Oscar night gets, the heavier the air becomes. Backstage, the Academy's people hear what's coming. They know Brando's statement is long, too long, dangerous. They decide the message will be controlled, time-limited, contained, made appropriate. A countdown is prepared like a weapon. 60 seconds. If she goes longer, they will remove her. That's the plan. Out front, security tightens. Names are checked, invitations scrutinized, and native attendees, people who should have been honored guests on a night celebrating storytelling, feel the cold wall of suspicion. The industry that loved playing Indians on screen suddenly doesn't want native people near its microphone. Now shift your focus for a second, away from the bright stage and into Brando's mind. Because Brando isn't doing this from a comfortable distance. He knows what happens when you cross powerful people in public. You don't just lose invitations, you lose work, you lose allies. You become difficult, and in Hollywood, that word is a slow professional death. And yet, he still chooses it. Quick question. Have you ever been trapped between loyalty and truth, where either choice meant losing something you couldn't bear to lose? If you've felt that kind of pressure, tell us in the comments, because that's the knife edge Brando was walking. Oscar night arrives like a drumbeat. The seats fill, the orchestra plays, the winners rehearse gratitude in their heads, and somewhere behind the curtains, a young native woman holds a statement that could set the room on fire. Brando stays away by design. He refuses to give Hollywood his face to react to. He gives them something worse, his absence. And right before the envelope is opened, the room still believes it's in control. It isn't. But that's not the real story. Because the most shocking part isn't that Brando refused the Oscar. It's what happened when Hollywood tried to block native voices at the door, and Brando forced them onto the stage anyway. Best Actor. The words hang in the air like a held breath. The nominees are read, and the room tightens with expectation. This is the moment the ceremony is built around. The crown jewel. Then the envelope opens. Marlon Brando. Applause surges like a reflex. Some people stand. Others clap because everyone else is clapping. It's automatic. It's Hollywood congratulating Hollywood for recognizing a performance too powerful to ignore. But Brando doesn't appear. Instead, a woman walks out, calm, composed, carrying herself with a dignity that doesn't ask permission. Sacheen Littlefeather reaches the microphone. The room's applause falters, confused, still polite but no longer sure. She raises her hand slightly. Not dramatic, just enough to stop the wave. And then she speaks. She says Brando cannot accept the award. She says he refuses it because of the motion picture industry's treatment of American Indians and because of what is happening at Wounded Knee. The temperature of the room changes. You can feel it in the silence between claps. The kind of silence that isn't peaceful. The kind that measures how much trouble a person is causing. And backstage, the plan is already in motion. A timer, a limit, a threat. If she goes too long, security will remove her from the stage. Hollywood's biggest night has just become a standoff. But to understand why this single minute hit like a punch, you have to understand what Hollywood had been feeding America for generations. For decades, Native people were written as obstacles, faceless attackers, primitive stereotypes, disposable bodies that made the hero look brave. Even when a film pretended to be sympathetic, it still treated Native life like background scenery for someone else's destiny. That isn't just bad art, it shapes how a country thinks. It teaches children who deserves empathy and who doesn't. It turns real suffering into entertainment and then sells popcorn. Brando had watched that machine work up close. He had watched audiences cheer for violence as long as it was packaged as the West. And he had watched studios congratulate themselves for progress while changing almost nothing. So when Wounded Knee erupted into national attention, Native people demanding to be heard, Brando didn't see politics. He saw a mirror, and he realized the Oscars weren't just an awards show. They were a megaphone. If the industry refused to invite the truth in through the front door, he would force it through the microphone. Back in the room, Littlefeather continues, careful, controlled, her voice steady against a tide that keeps trying to pull her under. Some people boo, not loudly at first, testing the waters. Others hiss, some clap to cover their discomfort. A few sit frozen, staring straight ahead, like if they don't move, they won't be implicated. And the Academy's people are watching her like hawks. She has more to read. Brando's full statement is long, detailed, unforgiving, but she knows the rules they've set for her. She knows the threat. She keeps it brief because she understands something the room doesn't. Sometimes surviving the moment is the only way to keep telling the truth tomorrow. Still, even with restraint, the message lands. The camera catches faces that look insulted, as if being confronted with injustice is ruder than committing it. You can hear the room dividing in real time, between those who feel attacked and those who suddenly realize they've been applauding a lie. And then there's the part they didn't want the public to see. Backstage, John Wayne is there, an American icon, a symbol of the very Western mythology Brando is challenging. Wayne is furious, not mildly irritated, furious enough that security has to restrain him, physically holding him back from charging the stage. Think about that. On Hollywood's most civilized night, a Native woman stands at a microphone, and the response behind the curtain is force. That contrast is the whole story in one snapshot. Native voices controlled, limited, threatened, while power paces in the dark, ready to silence them the old-fashioned way. Engagement moment, because this is where people miss the real detail. What would you have done in that room? Would you have booed to fit in, clapped to look good, or stayed silent because you were afraid? Tell us below honestly, because the truth is, moments like this don't just reveal celebrities, they reveal the crowd. Littlefeather finishes her short refusal. She nods. She turns to leave, and the applause that follows is scattered, half respect, half relief that the discomfort might be over. It isn't, because the true turn happens in the space Brando creates by not being there. No triumphant speech, no charming grin to soften the blow, no celebrity magic trick to make the audience forgive itself. Just an empty space where the winner should have been, filled instead with a reminder that Hollywood's stories had consequences, and those consequences had names and graves and broken treaties. Brando's refusal shocks everyone because it breaks the contract. The contract says, "We give you fame, you give us gratitude." Brando answers, "Keep your trophy, give them dignity." And as Littlefeather disappears behind the curtain, the industry scrambles to regain control, because control is what the Oscars are really about. Not truth, not justice. Control. But a crack has formed in the room, and every person inside can feel it. They just don't know yet how much that crack will cost. The ceremony moves on, because that's what institutions do when they're wounded. They keep smiling, they keep playing music. They keep handing out prizes like nothing happened. But in the building, the air stays heavy. Backstage, Littlefeather faces hostility that doesn't need fists to be violent. Cold stares, sharp words, people treating her like she committed the crime, not the people she spoke about. The message was only a minute, but it left bruises everywhere. On egos, on reputations, on the Academy's illusion that art can stay above human suffering. And then the story keeps moving, quietly, brutally, into the machinery that decides what the public is allowed to remember. Because Brando's full statement exists, it was meant to be read. Page after page calling out the industry's degradation of Native people, connecting Hollywood's fantasies to real-world cruelty. The Academy didn't want it in the room, so they contained it. They limited the microphone. They framed the moment as a disruption, not a reckoning. They let headlines reduce a moral stand to controversy, because controversy is easier to sell than guilt. And there was another silence, too, the way security became the muscle behind the politeness. People remember the boos. People remember the refusal. Fewer people remember what the title of this story is really about. Native Americans being blocked, treated like intruders on a night built on their stolen image. The same industry that loved a painted face on screen didn't want the real thing in the lobby. Fast forward and you see the cost. Brando's relationship with the Academy never recovers. He becomes an easy punchline for people who need him to be a clown, so they don't have to admit he was right. Littlefeather carries the weight for decades, praised by some, punished by others, as if telling the truth is a career you're not allowed to keep. And here's the deeper reveal. That moment wasn't a celebrity stunt. It was a warning shot. Because when a culture refuses to let people speak, it doesn't stay quiet. It turns that silence into policy, into policing, into security, into doors that don't open. Engagement moment number 4. So what do you think really drove the reaction that night? Simple anger at politics, or fear that the public might finally connect Hollywood's myths to America's real history? Which one makes more sense to you? Tell us your theory. Decades later, the story stops being just a rumor passed between film people. The details harden, accounts align, the restraint backstage, the time limit, the way the room turned cold, the way the truth was treated like a threat. And when you listen to the audio now, you can hear it. Not just what was said, but what was being fought. A minute on a microphone and an industry trying to keep Native voices outside the door. Marlon Brando is easy to simplify. Hollywood tried. Genius actor, difficult man, brilliant, messy, impossible. But that Oscar night reveals something sharper than the usual legend. It shows a man who understood that fame is borrowed power, and that borrowed power means nothing if you never spend it on anyone but yourself. Brando didn't walk onto that stage to be loved. He stayed away so the message couldn't be softened by his charisma. He forced the audience to face the words without the comfort of his smile. And it also shows something darker about Hollywood. When the truth arrives in a body it can't control, it reaches for control anyway. Timers, threats, security at the doors, restraint behind the curtain. The glamour is real, but so is the fear underneath it. The legacy of that moment isn't a trophy refused. It's a question that still burns. Who gets to be heard, and who gets treated like a problem the moment they speak for themselves? Because the truth is that room didn't just judge Brando, it judged itself. So here's the question for you. If you had 1 minute on the biggest microphone in the world, would you use it to protect your career, or to tell a truth that makes powerful people furious? And one more, tell us in the comments which forgotten legend we should investigate next. Option A, Steve McQueen's secret war with Hollywood, or Option B, the night James Dean predicted his own end. Marlon Brando is gone, but this story needed to be told.